Well, it is hard to believe that we are already almost wrapping up the month of January in 2024. We got to talk about how the weather situation has evolved here in the early part of the year, where it could be going as well as spring planting in the U.S. is definitely not too far away. Also, want to touch on South American weather conditions and more. Joining us for a conversation, Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Eric, good to talk with you again. Hope you had a good weekend. And, for the most part, looked like the weekend mild across much of the U.S., fairly quiet start to our work week here as we look to round out the month of January. And that's kind of I think one of the headlines as to what January has given us, at least the last few days here anyway.
Yeah, I would add one more word onto that, or two more words: foggy and sloppy. Right? I mean, we just had so much fog last week with the January thaw that came through with all that snow on the ground. We just saturated the lower atmosphere, and it was just. I don't know about you, man. I don't feel like I've seen the sun in like 10 days, and I'd like to
No.
see it. I understand you're going to Orlando, though, so you're going to win this whole race to seeing the sun battle because I will end up going. I'm not going there. Well, wait. I'm going to Reno later this week for a big conference. I will see the sun out there, I hope. But anyways, yeah, it's been wet. So let's think about where it's been wet and where it's been not. The northern plains, the upper Midwest, like the UP of Michigan, and then go back over to Montana. That whole strip has been missing out on all of this flow. But you come into parts from like eastern Texas all the way through the Mississippi Valley, which down in the southern Mississippi Valley, tremendous flooding. Get all the way almost to the East Coast. There's only a little stripe in parts of the Carolinas and Georgia that didn't get any rain. And you've got a big section of the country that's super wet. Now, I looked at root zone soil moisture this morning, and I'll be honest with you, the numbers look like they've started to make a recovery that's worth talking about. I took a sample. I just do this every once in a while. I have my own soil probe. And so I took one in the backyard because I was in an area that was in powder through December. I mean, you couldn't have, it was hard to even push it through the ground, even though the ground wasn't frozen. Well, I pulled up 16 inches and it is like mud down 16 inches, which means there's some places that imagine you cultivated that field in the fall, or not cultivated, but reindeer plow through. I mean, my goodness, you're going to have moisture that you're storing. So this is a good thing. It's just been really kind of gross and wet, but mild. Holy cow. Today in North Dakota, they may crack 50. Tomorrow, they may crack 55, which remember 12 days ago, it was a wind chill of minus 50. So 105 degree swing in temperatures is pretty impressive for that area. So yes, the end of January is going to be mild, and we're just going to watch the West now for the next setup.
Well, and to your point there too, I mean, just those are temperature readings that we don't hear of in January and February. So, I mean, looking at all of this, how does this kind of set us up here for the next, I'll say month ahead? I mean, we can, pull that back to a couple weeks. I know you get past a certain amount of weeks, you can't really tell necessarily, but I mean, your view, what you're seeing, how are we kind of set up here going into February and a little beyond that?
Yeah. Well, just a reminder, we got Groundhog's Day later this week. Who cares? Just don't, let's not give it any credit. But, just something that I think it's actually a fun holiday and it's a good time. And I was actually in Pennsylvania last week and I was talking to them about Groundhog's Day. And I was with a huge group of Amish folks, about 600 of them. And, they reminded me that this is actually the time of year when groundhogs do come out of hibernation. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. I thought it was a little bit later, but that's all besides the point. The animal's not predictive in terms of forecasting the weather. But I think what I need to do is not watch Pennsylvania, but watch the other side of the country. There's a piece of the jet that's extending across the Pacific with an average speed of 200 miles an hour. In fact, last night, Jesse, I watched a flight leave Seoul, South Korea that's supposed to land this morning in Detroit. And it did not take its normal Great Circle route. It actually went right in the heart of the winds. And for about 4 hours last night going across the Pacific, it had a tailwind of 200 miles an hour. So its intended flying speed was 566, but its ground speed was 766. I watched it on Flight Tracker. It was so much fun. Now, what's the point in saying that? If you get all that flow coming into the West, there's no cold air to talk about. So we just cannot get cold air coming into central parts of North America if you've got the jet stream so lined out and so fast across the Pacific. So when do we get cold air? It may not be until the back half of February. I think
Mhm.
February is going to be a little drier in parts of the mid South, Midwest, Ohio Valley, a little bit, not dry, but a little drier, but wet in California, maybe wetter in the plains. That's going to be critical for winter wheat. That's going to be critical for the crops. It's going to be, I think, a little bit wetter, in parts of, gosh, maybe the Southeast could stay wet. There's a lot of things that I think are going to be good with this pattern, but I don't see it getting cold. That's for sure.
Has some of this recent moisture that we have seen in January, though, we've talked about this a little bit, and I know recently we've got some heavy rain in the mid South areas and the Delta the
Mhm.
last week or so. I mean, is all of this really helping out the drought conditions? Because I know parts of the Midwest, like Iowa, with that snow, plus then I think about the Delta regions. There were some pretty nasty pockets of drought there. So has all of this moisture helped us greatly or just a little bit, Eric?
Well, one event's not going to undo all of it, but it's the right direction. I mean, it's
Okay.
the right direction. It's caused a lot of flooding. I've seen some good recovery, and the Mississippi River is back 12 feet above low stage. There's a lot of flooding in Illinois right now in our river system. I look at all of it and say, if we have to have a nasty winter if we want to have a great spring and summer. So,
Mhm.
yeah, this volatility, I think it's a net benefit overall.
Okay. Let's go to South America. And I know watching Argentina, some concerns popping up there in terms of heat and dryness here late in their season. So, why don't we start there and let's talk about what's the latest you're seeing in South America, Eric?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of talk about that. I've been seeing people say, "Oh, Argentina's gonna get really, really hot." I don't know if they're just looking for a story, because we've got to remember
Okay.
Argentina's NDVI value right now is the highest it's been. The crop looks amazing. There's been moisture, so you bring in a little heat. Okay, as long as it doesn't last for like 3 straight weeks, then we're okay. And I don't see that happening. It's going to pop. There'll be storms that are going to happen, and the reality is that they've been set up to handle a little bit of stress going forward. Planting progress in terms of corn is a bit behind north, and we expected that. But I'll be honest, the news story that I think we're going to have to watch for South America isn't necessarily going to be in the short term. It's going to be out there in March and April. There is some concern that given El Nino, that we're going to see an early slowdown of the monsoon, and we could have problems in those areas. Like we're talking Mato Grosso, Goiás, Tocantins. These are the northern and central growing areas that need that late season moisture to help the crop finish. I'm talking about Serena, the corn crop. So if I'd say
Mhm.
there's a play right now in South America, it's going to actually be corn rather than anything else. So we've got to watch the end of the season now, because the middle of the season I think is doing okay.
With Brazil, right now, I know they're trying to harvest soybeans and get ready to put that safrita corn in the ground. It seems like the pace of that harvest is still fairly on schedule, Eric. Is that kind of what you've seen and heard in terms of what we're dealing with weather there?
Yes, but that was expected, right? Because remember, rewind the clock back to September.
Yeah.
Bunch of growers got to plant early September rather than September 15th. And then their progress through the beginning of October was really fast. So that crop is done. Let's get it out. We expected, because the heat came on in November and December, that it's going to be the mid to late planted stuff that gets harvested much later than ever. So it's going to be funny. The curve starts off fast, then flattens out, and then picks up again at the very end. So yeah, and by the way, we should expect some of this early planted stuff to not have good yield. It shouldn't. I mean, so if you start hearing yield numbers like backing off and backing off, I'm like, yep, that was the stuff that got put in early and got hit with all that heat and drought. And we don't expect good yields out of that. The question is, did the later planted stuff do better with all of the January rain that came in just in time to save some of it? And that, I think, is why I have the bigger play on corn right now than soybeans.
Good perspective to have for sure. All right, Eric, let's wrap it up for today. Any final thoughts from you in terms of U.S., South America, or anything else you're watching around the world in terms of weather here this week?
I just make this statement. It'll be important to watch all energy markets. I mean, I understand there's a lot of things that affect it, but I'm thinking a lot about natural gas, because right now, Central North America, very mild, and most of Europe and Russia, very mild. So we have these two major population centers that have now just seen a pretty big drop in their heating degree demand, which means what that term results in terms of consumption is going to change as well. So that'll be a good story to watch over the next couple of weeks evolve too.
Fantastic. Well, folks can stay up to date with the latest weather at ag-wx.com. They can also sign up for your weekly weather newsletter there as well, ag-wx.com. With that, Eric Stockgrass with Nutrient Ag Solutions. Eric, good to talk with you, and we'll see you in person next week in Nashville. So looking forward to it, my friend.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.